But we are here to talk about mental health and wellbeing. We're here to talk about some people's personal journeys with that and how they hope that can help people and assist people moving forward. And then we've got some other stuff to talk about at the end of it as well, I appreciate. So I'm going to not talk for much longer now. I'm going to pass over to Liz, who's going to have this opportunity to share her personal experiences and how she's used it to help herself and how she hopes that will give other people strength to do so moving forward. So it's over to you, Liz. I will mute myself and disappear.
Thank you, Hannah, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this kind of hashtag break the bias, but particularly break the bias for mental health. So I recently became co-chair of Wishes, and I'm also the Safer Homes Director at Hyde Housing. And yeah, I just thought I would share my journey with you. So thank you. So approximately 13 years ago, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And probably up until about 18 months ago, it was something that I felt truly ashamed about. I felt truly ashamed to talk about it at work, feeling fearful that I would lose my job, I wouldn't be respected. And more so the fact that I had to take medication, to take 2 little white tablets that would keep me on the straight and narrow, again, made me feel hugely ashamed. That coupled by being a woman who overly shares and is quite emotional, really started to make me dislike myself. I was living a lie, never really truthful about myself. And although there was a perception that mental health was being talked about more widely, it was still really, really hard for me to open up about. And I'm really hoping today that we can share these journeys and be really open about our kind of past and our mental well-being. So my depression stems from quite a traumatic childhood. I suffered abuse from the people who should have been there to protect me the very most. My mother was an alcoholic and a manic depressive. She spent significant periods of time in and out of specialist facilities, which meant me and my brother had to spend time living with my grandparents and under the protection of social services. This story that I'm going to tell in the journey is not about pity, but it's one for let's get together and be open and honest. My mum would often shame me, telling me that I would never achieve much in my life. And actually, once she told me I would stand outside Glasgow bus station to be a prostitute. She also told me that if her baby boy had survived, Daniel, I would never have been born, and she really wished that would have happened. Being an alcoholic and living through the kind of 80s and 90s was really difficult, particularly in Scotland. She would spend most of her money on alcohol, leaving really little for food and clothes. I can remember having to wear carrier bags on my feet because I had so many holes in my shoes and my feet would get really, really wet. So not a great look for a tiny, scrawny little kind of 10-year-old who had big, massive glasses on and was like the size of a peanut. So that also made me a prime target for kids at school, because kids can be quite harsh at times. So perfect bullying tactics happened. And I was withdrawn and I never really knew how to socialise with kids because I was never really allowed out to play with my friends. My brother, who is 5 years older than me, was phenomenal and would almost like try and protect me. However, quite rightly, when he was 16, he joined the army because he wanted to get away. So that just left me and my mum. From there, I was living in a constant state of anxiety and not really knowing what mood my mum would be in. I think if we were to look back and reflect now, she would definitely be classed as bipolar. I would walk in never really knowing how much vodka she would drink. That was her tipple. And I think the most she drank in a day was probably about 3.5 bottles, which is quite good going. I've also felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells because I always just never wanted to upset the apple cart and never wanted to make a cross or get her upset because I know it would just escalate. However, saying that, some days she was absolutely phenomenal and probably the best mum that you could ever ask for. But again, still working and kind of living on eggshells, never knowing if that would change. She was literally a Jekyll and Hyde. one incident, and she always said that she didn't want me to progress. She wanted me to stay at home with her. So just before my standard grades, that's GCSEs exams, she took an overdose and was admitted to hospital. And during this particular time that she was taken to hospital, I went with her, and the doctors came out and said that I had to section her. And being a kind of 14, 15-year-old, I had really kind of no idea what that meant. So they talked me through. I had to sign the paperwork, and then it had to go to the kind of the court in Dumbarton. And then she was admitted to the psychiatric unit. And it was a psychiatric hospital that was about 2.5 hours away. So I get to see her maybe kind of once every other week for about 2.5 hours. During this time, Mum was given quite an intensive course of electric shock treatment, which in later life caused her to have many, many fits. And that also then started to play and give her a lot of outbursts. She did also suffer from arthritis and was in pain a lot, so it was down to me to do a lot of the kind of the housework, cooking and cleaning. When I got to 16, I wanted to follow in my brother's footsteps. I wanted to join the army. I needed to get away from home. However, I had to have her permission, and she wouldn't allow me. So then I spent the next few years just kind of making some pretty bad decisions, getting into some pretty bad situations. And I kind of got to a crossroads when I turned 18. And on my 18th birthday, I thought now's the time for me to do something. I didn't want to be that person my mum had said that I was going to be. So I joined the army. So being in the army actually gave me a whole lot of structure and routine, which was fantastic. I didn't have to think about anything, didn't really need to kind of do or say. It was just like, do this private hall. Okay, how far do you want me to jump? I'll jump that high. So that was quite a nice vehicle for me just to kind of move out of home and start to kind of experience life. During the time in the army, I spent 8.5 years. I got married and moved into married quarters, which again is a very much military lifestyle and kind of going through that progression. However, my husband was quite controlling. So again, it was very much structured and told what to do, what to wear. And then I left the army just as my first daughter was born and moved to Cyprus. And the military have an amazing terminology of if you move somewhere with your husband or partner that's in the army, you're called and classed as a dependent. I mean, just what an amazing tone that you could just give somebody is, yeah, you're a dependent. So living in Cyprus, I got myself a little job. I had my daughter, and just kind of didn't really know again who or where I fitted in with life. I would always watch people just trying to take their little traits, thinking, is that how I should be? Very much a people pleaser. So I'd always kind of, oh yeah, that's really good. I'll try and be like that, or maybe I should be like that. Reflecting back, I probably had imposter syndrome for about 25 years, and that's really, really hard work. Trying to fit in, trying to be somebody else, and not really knowing who you are. In 2006, my mum lost her battle with alcoholism. It destroyed her body, and I was devastated. But also, being honest, I was quite relieved because I didn't have to worry about that. My second daughter was born in 2008, and we'd moved back to the UK. I hadn't lived in the UK for about 8.5 years, and just started to really struggle to fit in with life. We were still living in married quarters. I was working full time, and I was told, well, you can't love your children if you work full time. You know, if your husband's in the army, you shouldn't be working. You should be making scones and doing flower arranging, which is just so not me. Work has always been the one thing that got me through. However, after the birth of my second daughter, I really, really struggled. I struggled with parenting because I looked at my children and started to see the love that you have for children, and I just could never understand why somebody could hurt another human being the way that I had been hurt. In 2012, and actually it was 3 days after the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, I hit a wall. I just couldn't cope. I lived in fear. I was really, really unhappy, and I just didn't know how to be a person. I had two choices. Choice one was leave my husband and just go through life and just try and find out who I was. And the second option is unthinkable, but it was there. It was thoughts. I had written the letter, but something inside me had given me that kick and to say, Liz, come on, you can do this. You can move your life. I left living in Malarkey quarters. I didn't really have anywhere to go. I had a friend who said, just move into my house. She was living abroad. And as soon as I walked through that door, even though I was breaking up a family and it's all the way that it should be, I knew I had made the right decision. I was lonely, I was scared, but I know it was right. In 2018, I married Tom, who has just been the absolute rock and the love of my life. He supported me through therapy, supported me in my career in housing, supported me becoming a yoga instructor, but most supported me in dealing and opening up about my mental health. As I said, work has always been the one thing that has focused me. Being repeatedly told that I would be a failure really sparked something inside me, and I wanted to prove that I could be something. The army taught me respect. Housing has taught me the compassion that we have for other people. However, still working in a very male-dominated environment where you need to man up and don't be soft, don't show your emotions. I've started to show my emotions, and I've started to try and show people that having that little bit of compassion for your team, for people that you work with, because you never know what's going on behind closed doors, just gives them a little bit of support. So really, the day I got married, I did a speech, and I told my husband that I thanked him for allowing me to live and making me believe in me and making me a nice person. At work, I just have the most amazing and inspiring team, and there's a couple on here today. During the pandemic, we started talking about mental health because it was a really tough period of time. And then over a period of time, I started to open up and talk about my struggles, and I wasn't judged. But other people would say, oh yeah, I felt like this, and I've done this. And then we opened up a conversation. So here I was, kind of having spent years and years feeling completely embarrassed and shamed. To feel like the kind of that pressure vessel had been released, it felt like a weight had been completely lifted off my shoulders. I never thought I would achieve half of what I've achieved. I've got two absolutely fantastic, if not slightly moody teenagers. I've got two stepdaughters that have accepted me into their life, and a very amazing and patient husband. Someone who's seen me at my very lowest and has guided me. But I do want my children and others to see that life isn't all unicorns and fairy dust. No matter what happens, just a little bit of hard work, perseverance, and sometimes a little bit of stubbornness, you can achieve great things. Not everybody's going to like you, and I've accepted that. I am not a gin and tonic or a piece of chocolate. Nobody is going to like me that much. But it has taken me a long time to accept who I am. I still have dark days. I still have days where I question my ability, but I don't want anybody else to feel ashamed of talking and living with a mental health issue. We are all so very, very unique. Embrace it. Have your quirks. Be yourself. Don't try and be anybody else but yourself. Be you. Be kind to others. Most importantly, be kind to yourself. Be open and honest. But most importantly, let's break the bias of mental health. Thank you very much.
I'm going to lead the clap there, but I can see other people clapping. So Liz, thank you for sharing a incredibly personal insight, but a really powerful one too. And I know from my perspective, it is truly humbling to have been in a room, virtual room even, with somebody that shares that. So thank you so very, very much. And undoubtedly, there are many people on this call and many people outside of this that probably think that you're an inspiration. So from me to you, thank you for being so brave and so generous in your time to share that story today. I'm really conscious I've got a few minutes to ask if anybody wants to ask questions or share anything. I can read you out a few things what people are saying. Which is unsurprising. Liz, that was a beautiful speech, very touching and inspiring. Thank you. What an inspiration you are, Liz. And absolutely, completely right. Thank you so very much. I think it might be good if we move into Laura now, who's going to talk to us about the kind of next side to this, is about actually how we can kind of, from a perspective to support people, enable people, help people, and actually what we can do to make sure that people are being treated fairly and appropriately within the workplace, and what we can do to assist. So if I hand over to Laura now, and I'm sure at the end of this we can have another lovely conversation, but I'm going to hand over to Laura, and who's looking remarkably well considering, Laura, as we've all said.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I have just come down with COVID, so I've put a lot of red lipstick on, and yeah, put a bit of makeup. Trust me, underneath all this I don't look like this, and I am going to bed straight afterwards. But anyway, thank you so much, Liz. Honestly, you really touched me today. It's a real pleasure to come here and talk to you all about a topic which is also very close to my heart. Absolutely remarkable journey. And I imagine that you have probably learned so much from those experiences, despite them probably being so devastatingly painful to deal with. So well done again. And again, thanks for the invite for me to come here and talk to you about this subject. So over the years that I've been practicing, I've regularly advised on the topic of mental health. However, I have noticed over recent years that I've increasingly advising on this subject, and that's not surprising, really, is it, given the current global situations we're facing. But also, I like to think that there is a bit of a shift in the stigma towards mental health. The more we are talking about it and opening up, I think this is I'm hoping that it's a positive thing that we're doing. And certainly when I'm now speaking to employees, a few years ago when we were talking about mental health, if I'm really honest, sometimes it was a bit more negative, whereas now I am seeing employers looking a little bit more broadly and being a bit more open-minded when they do have someone in the workplace who is suffering from a mental health situation. I think we're also recognising and accepting, as you say, Liz, that we all have a mental health and we're all going to go and have ebbs and flows. So we go up and down in life. A great bit of advice that I heard in a training session a few years ago is to picture mental health almost like a line. At one end, you've got the extreme mental health disorders. The other end, you've got the good mental health. And what tends to happen for most of us is we sort of go up and down at this end. But, there are people that are having a tougher time who are down this end. And that really has an extreme day-to-day impact on their lives. I myself have good and bad days like today, a bit of a bad day in the house with young children and COVID, but it's one of those things, isn't it? And to be honest, a few years ago, I also had quite a tough time after the birth of my 2 children. So before I had kids, I was merrily climbing the career ladder. I could go to networking events. I could work as many hours as I wanted, socialising with family and colleagues, etc. And then boom, as much as I love and adore my kids, it was a bit of a shock to the system when they don't sleep. So ultimately I wasn't well rested. I'm probably still not well rested, but that's obviously one of the key things they tell you when looking after your mental health. So today, what I've been asked to do is give you just that bit of advice on how to deal with mental health in the workplace. I know I've probably got a mix of people who I'm talking to. I might have managers listening, I might have some employees. So I'm just going to give some generic advice, taking into account the audience, because essentially I've worked on both sides. I've represented employees when they've needed to bring claims or they've needed support to raise grievances. And I've also trained employers and helped them defend their position when it's all gone wrong. And ultimately, it's important for all of us because I think it was a quote from mine that was saying that they did a survey and it's 1 in 4 employees in the UK are reported having a mental health condition. Ultimately, if we don't deal with these issues, it causes loss of productivity, costs a lot of time and money. And stress, depression, anxiety are the leading causes of sickness absence, and they can create, you know, millions of pounds worth of working days which are lost, and it's very, very costly. And also we have to be mindful of the discriminatory laws that we have in place, which need to be followed to protect the vulnerable in our society, but can also lead to expensive and stressful claims. The other point also to be aware of is, and it's not one that people always remember, is in terms of health and safety, we've got obligations as employers, but also as colleagues and things to look after our colleagues, so we can make sure there is that safe environment for employees to work in. As otherwise, you know, in extreme cases, if someone has been poorly or hasn't been looked after, or has suffered harassment or abuse at work, then it could lead to personal injury claims in a worst case scenario. And also, on a final point, just to emphasize why it's important here for us to talk about these things, is obviously we've got to help the NHS as well. It's under lots of pressure at the moment. NHS obviously plays a key part in keeping people with mental health illnesses in employment, but we also have that important role to play to support staff to stay well and keep in work. So as I always say, my motto is preventing is better than cure. I see matters when it costs an awful amount of money and time to deal with it via litigation. Far better to invest time to avoid that tribunal on both sides. And what I tend to say to employers when advising the context of mental health is the starting point is, as a bare minimum, and I hope this is the case for all of you, you've got those policies on mental health in place, so staff know where to access them, they know how to get support. And these aren't just policies that you dust off as and when you need them, they need to be actively and regularly referred to create that open culture. So I always say, look, get your policies in place first of all, and then build on that. You know, add in then perhaps your mental health champions or mental health first aiders within the workplace that you can, that then staff can contact if they are feeling low. And these people can be trained how to help staff. And I'm sure I'd be interested to know actually how many of you do have these champions in place, because from the clients I've worked with, they have been such a good way of helping people when they feel low. So perhaps that person doesn't need to go directly to their manager, they can go to a peer, so a colleague, to say, look, I'm having a hard day, can you help me? And at least then that peer can signpost in the right direction. The other thing also, I've just seen, thanks, that someone's just put online that, there we go. Lots of people say that they've got all sorts of champions and first aiders in place. That's fantastic to hear. And what I also say, it's not just those people who perhaps are trained, you get all your staff trained on mental health, what it looks like in practice, signs to look out for, and perhaps then that more sophisticated training for managers who are dealing with sickness, absence, or poorly performing staff. They may need help, for example, on what questions they need to ask from occupational health, which I'll touch on in a moment. It's not just a quality training here, it's training on processes and spotting those signs in this situation. And that's where I see that organisations are falling down. They've got that general quality policies and training, but it's actually going that one step further and thinking, actually, we need to think broadly and work out what we're doing as organisations here. And other ways, and again, I'm sure you're all doing this, of making sure you're committing to a healthy workplace culture, is to think about sort of mindfulness and exercise for all staff. Staff surveys are always a good one, actually, to ask people what they want. It can be done anonymously then, and you can really get a feel as to what people want. There's also often situations where employers have groups where they engage and really find out what staff want on the ground, whether it's peer support, mentoring and coaching programs, also very useful. And if you don't have this, then you might want to speak to HR and just make that suggestions. Perhaps get a group together where you can lobby for this, because it's often the fear of discrimination and the feelings of shame which are among the top reasons why people don't share their mental health problems. But if we create those workplace cultures where people can be themselves, it's easier then to reach out for help when they need it. Now, in terms, I'm just going to give you a snapshot from a legal perspective of the key things and the key discriminatory things to be aware of, which I'm sure, again, most of you will be familiar with. So you've probably all heard of the Equality Act. I hope you are aware, but in a nutshell, there is protection under the Equality Act for anyone who is disabled. And to be disabled, it can be any impairment, whether physical or mental, that has a substantial adverse and long-term impact on someone's ability to carry out their everyday tasks. So it's not just the stereotypical disabled person in a wheelchair that will be protected here. It actually covers and is covering more and more people. Obviously, when we're assessing whether someone is disabled, it needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. But just don't assume that it's not covered because it's not immediately obvious, because that's another thing I see where people trip up. And in terms of the types of discrimination, just to give you a quick overview of the key areas, you've obviously got the direct discrimination where someone is treated less favorably compared to others because of their disability. For example, you might have someone who suffers, say, from bipolar disorder, and they're denied any promotion because they've got bipolar. You've then got discrimination arising from a disability, which is slightly different. I'll give you an example here. So you might have an employer who dismisses a worker because they've had a period of sick leave, and the employer is aware the worker has had depression, and that's why they've taken the sick leave. And as such, that sick leave is, if she is deemed to be disabled because of the depression, that sick leave would be disability related. So if the employer took a decision to dismiss, for example, because of that time off, then that could arise to this discrimination arising from a disability. There are certain exceptions that in that situation, which I can speak about if needed. And then indirect discrimination, that's a little bit different. That's, for instance, if you had someone who was taking a form of medication, for instance. So I always give the example of perhaps a schizophrenic who is taking a form of medication. Employer wants to make some changes to her shift patterns, which would mean she'd be working later and doing later shifts, but she says, actually, I can't do this because it's going to make me more tired. It will exacerbate my disorder. I can't do it. But we said, no, we've got to do it. It could be indirect discrimination unless we could justify there is a proportionate need for that. Harassment, again, there could be harassment if you've got a situation where someone is engaging in unwanted conduct relating to someone's disability, which has the purpose or effect of violating someone's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for someone. An example might be, for instance, someone who's been teased or called names because they're suffering from severe anxiety in the workplace. And then I'm sure you've probably heard of this one, a requirement to make reasonable adjustments. So often when you've got disabled people in a workplace, there may be a situation where you have to make, or you should be making, reasonable adjustments to their work environment to help them. For instance, you might have someone who is struggling with depression, finds it difficult to get up at a certain time, and as such, you might want to just allow them start a little bit later or finish a bit earlier due to the side effects that perhaps they're experiencing from their disability or any medication. And on a final note, there's victimization, which is where you've got a situation where someone might be penalized, for example, because they're suffering from a disability, and they have then raised and complained about themselves being treated unfairly, or about anyone else who has been penalized because of something to do with their disability. There's also a final point I should also mention as well about pre-employment health questionnaires. It's actually that you've got to be very careful when asking job applicants about pre-employment health questionnaires for other than for prescribed reasons. So that's a bit of a summary about the legal side of things. You know, what can we do? I think the main thing that for me, that where I see businesses and organizations trip up is that people don't look at the bigger picture. They might have someone who's off every Monday and they start going down the capability route or disciplinary route with someone, and they're not thinking actually, why is that person taking time off? What's happening? Is there any medical evidence, occupational health? You know, there might be something going on here, and it's about seeing the bigger picture. And what can we do ourselves to help others? Well, make sure that you're all looking after the basics, you know, exercise, sleep, eating habits. If you're working from home, just make sure you're having that regular social interaction, reach out to people. And then when you're helping other people with mental health problems, you know, make sure that you try and be as warm and authentic as possible. Open up, like, for example, how Liz has, you know, try and explore and experiment with how you're speaking to people about your own situation. And if you have got someone that wants to discuss things with you, find that appropriate time and place. Actively listen to people, which again is a skill that not everyone has, and you may need some training in that situation. And then try and sort of manage your own feelings in this situation, because it can be quite difficult when taking on other people's problems. So you may need that support yourself. And if you are a line manager as well, just to add, you know, when managing absence and return to work, make sure you are thinking about reasonable adjustments, phased returns to work. For example, if you're unsure about what's reasonable, speak to HR, occupational health, ACAS, and remember that, you know, you should be having those good regular team meetings and building in time to have confidential supervision sessions with staff, and just keep that open mind as to whether a mental health concern could be part of a bigger picture. So I do hope that's a useful summary of the sort of key things to be aware of. Happy to answer any questions, or if there's anything in particular. I'll try to keep it quite broad at the moment because I appreciate we've got a mixture of people on the call, but by all means do shout and let me know.
Thank you, Laura. That was fabulous. That was super helpful and really insightful. And it's really good to hear what we can and can't do organisationally to try and get us to a place where we're supporting the right people. Just go with everybody. I've got a question, which you shouldn't do as a chair, but I feel like I'm going to pull rank a little bit here and ask the question, if that's okay. I often think in this sector, but in many professions, but particularly in this sector, we really come from a place of wanting to do the best thing for people that work for us. But inadvertently, sometimes by trying to do the best thing, can put people into a position where they feel pressure, or that actually it's having the counter effect. And you know, and then we get this kind of like, oh, what do we do legally? We get quite concerned about what that means, because actually we may have started from a place of actually wanting to help that individual. But you know, your example of that Monday point where we're trying to do something but we're probably going about it the wrong way, is that just a case of just being really open and honest with that individual and saying, look, I'm trying to help, I want to do the best thing with you? Is it a case of actually just asking them, you know, how can we help you, so that we do make sure that everybody's on an equal footing? So I feel like sometimes we can by accident cause more of an issue than we mean to, just by perhaps not asking the right questions.
That's spot on, Hannah. And I think, just going back to the HR point of view, I would always involve HR at an early stage, even if it's just to get that guidance, because where the mistakes can sometimes happen, and where also, because I often get people and businesses come to me, organizations, and they say, we've got this situation, it's been going on for like 9 months, and now we need to dismiss because ultimately that person can't do the job. And I say, well, we need to rewind, and we shouldn't shy away from using disciplinary and capability processes if needed, but they may need to be adapted. So I would always say, contact HR, get legal advice at an early stage if need be. I think you're quite right to speak to that person who you are engaging with, just to make sure that you understand the situation. For instance, the Monday point, as we just talked about, it might be that it's a simple solution which can be implemented like that, but chances are there may be a situation where we need to involve, for instance, a medical expert or occupational health who can actually help and guide us on the process. And again, that's where I see people tripping up, where they either don't involve occupational health early enough, or they ask the wrong questions of occupational health and don't get the responses that they need. And with occupational health, you know, whenever I'm engaging with them, or if I'm trying to find out more about the situation, it's really important to give a full explanation as to what's happening in practice, what the job involves, how it's impacting, the mental health is impacting on work and colleagues and so forth, to get that proper answer that you can then give. You can then adjust the position. But you know, where we've got to be careful of as line managers and organisations is obviously we want to make sure that we are following process, we're being consistent, because that's key as well, but we are adapting the process depending on the situation. For instance, if we have got someone who is disabled.
Thank you, Laura. Again, I really appreciate it. And thanks.
My voice has just held out, so.
Particularly when you've been feeling a little bit poorly. Really appreciate it. I'm now going to hand over to Lucy. So Lucy, it's lovely to have you here, our first Wish virtual event for the year. So super delighted to welcome you. I'm going to hand over to you and let you do your thing now, Lucy. So thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Hannah. And hello, everybody. And thank you for inviting me along to attend your amazing event today. Kickstarting International Women's Day week with a bang. And Liz, wow, how powerful that was. Thank you so much for sharing. You are a total inspiration. And Laura, you too, inspirational, really interesting. And wow, you look fantastic with COVID. You're doing so well. I hope you're feeling better soon, though, anyway. So, as Hannah said, my name's Lucy Mallarkey, and I'm the quite new Managing Director for Women in Social Housing, and the Director and co-founder of an EDI consultancy called Positive About Inclusion. I only joined the Wish family at the beginning of January as a new MD, and whilst I've only been in post a short time, because actually it's just a 1 day a week job, so the 2 months that I've actually been here, it's really only equates to 8 days. But in that time, I have totally fallen in awe with Wish and the amazing volunteers who make the organisation what it is. Fantastic. And what I'd like to talk about this afternoon is share with you a bit about my career journey and what I've learned along the way about authenticity, about the importance of being able to bring your whole self to work, and the value that we all have in the networks that we all have to provide that support that we need, you know, and at times we need it more than we do at other times. So my background is social housing through and through. I started actually as a housing trainee in 1993 for a local authority in the Northeast. And despite the fact that I'd found the housing module on the politics degree that I'd done before that so dull that I didn't even bother revising it for my finals, I entered social housing and totally fell in love with it almost straight away. I knew that I'd found my niche, and I was so lucky that starting as a trainee, it meant that I could go to different parts of the business. So I experienced every department, from development to homelessness, from policy to housing operations and care and support. It really was that housing operations, that frontline service delivery that I totally fell in love with. Worked happily there for a number of years, working my way up until one day I received a phone call, and it was one of those headhunting phone calls, the first time it ever happened to me. And I was totally like, oh, you know, like you do when somebody rings and says, you know, we've heard about you and would you like to apply for this job, which is more senior in another local authority in the Northeast as well. So, you know, as you are, totally applied, and I got the job. But I knew pretty early on that I'd made a dreadful mistake in moving. My new boss behaved like he was in the 70s, like it was in the 70s, like he was some sort of male from the 70s, despite the fact this was actually 1999. And I can recall being told to, well, just go downstairs, Lucy, to where the council chamber was, flirt your eyelashes at so-and-so councillor, and we'll get that allocation sorted. Likewise, I can remember this one time being in a meeting with a colleague and a friend who'd recently returned from maternity leave, and my boss saying, oh, I can see you're lactating. Just horrendous. This was 1999. It was like something from Life on Mars, wasn't it? It was just awful. I stayed less than a year, and I just wasn't able to be myself when I was there. I just put my head down. I just did what I needed to do. I wasn't engaged in the organisation. And the people who got me through really were my network. So my friends, my colleagues, the people I could talk to, the people I could be myself with, because at work, I just couldn't be myself at all. I really didn't like that time at all. But on reflection, and don't we all have rose-tinted glasses when we look back on time, it taught me a lot. And I learned 3 really important lessons that have stayed with me ever since. The first was that the grass isn't always greener, and never ever move to chase money. It's always the wrong motivation. The second thing was that it is your network that'll get you through hard times. Last week, we had a celebration event for all of the board members operating across all of the regions for Wish. And we had this brilliant speaker called Stacey Copeland come along. And she talked about filling up your petrol tank with positive fuel. And that's what your network does. They provide you with that top up of positivity. And I just love the way, she described it so much better than me, but filling up your petrol tank with positive petrol is so important. And the third thing was about values alignment and organizational culture, and feeling that sense of belonging. And that's the most important thing. And it's that sense of belonging that enables you to bring your whole self to work, to be your best. And that's something we all should want. And it's something we all deserve as well. So like I said, I left within a year, and actually I came back, and again, this was because of my network. Somebody found out where I used to work that I'd applied for somewhere else in the Northeast, and they rang me and said, oh, you're going somewhere else, come back to us. And they invited me for a drink, and alcohol can often help with these decisions as well, can't it? And I went for a drink, and I went back then to the organization where I'd started from. And once again, I loved everything I was doing. I felt that sense of belonging. I knew I was in the right place. 2 maternity leaves later, and in 2005, after returning back to work from, it was second maternity leave actually, I was asked to lead on equality, diversity and inclusion. Well, in fact, it wasn't even ED&I then. We'd just moved from equal ops to think about equality and diversity. The inclusion was, we didn't even know about it back then. But that was great because I was doing a job that I love, and I was able to pursue what was a real passion as well at the same time. So I really felt in the right place. Fast forward the clock, and in 2019, I was made redundant, and I took that opportunity that redundancy gave me to full-time pursue this passion. Because it's so true, isn't it, that there is a silver lining to every cloud, and we might not see it immediately. And, on being made redundant, absolutely, I had that total lack of confidence. What am I going to do? This is all that I've known. But people said to me, and eventually I then started to believe it, they said, do what you love, do what you should have been doing anyway. Do what you're good at. And so I did, and I set up this community interest company, and I'm absolutely loving what I'm doing there as well. And I came to Wish, like I say, at the beginning of this year, and I couldn't resist coming to Wish because of that values alignment, and that knowing that I would feel that sense of belonging. And so true, even 2 months, 8 days later, I really feel it, and I know I'm in the right place. It's an amazing organization full of amazing, inspirational, hardworking and committed women. And networking, let me just come back to that, because obviously that's what Wish is all about. It is about bringing women together to provide that safe space for us to be able to share our stories, like Liz done so eloquently today, to be able to learn, from experts like Laura. And it's a fantastic network, fantastic for every woman to be involved in. And, the reason why women's networking is still valid, because you don't have to be in any professional world for very long to know about that value of networking, and that the genders do network differently, which is why it's important that we do still have that safe space for women, that we can come together and support each other. There is often, of course, isn't there though, a criticism leveled at women's networks that they reinforce exclusivity as opposed to inclusion, but that's incorrect. And to explain that, let me just share a story with you, because this happened at the point that it was announced that I'd been made MD of Wish. So when the announcement was made and it went out on social media, you get those lots of lovely, congratulatory, supportive messages. All of them were lovely, bar one. And although this exception was by no means unpleasant, it came from a man who expressed the view that an equality network for women was just wrong, that it was a juxtaposition, a reinforcing exclusivity as opposed to promoting inclusion. I explained to that man that in fact he was wrong, that in a world where women still don't have equal standing, where we are subject to bias-based scrutiny, In a world where violence against women and girls is ever apparent, it's only a year since the murder of Sarah Everard, that in this world in which we still live, professional networks for women are still really, really valid. And I told him that having a group focused on women isn't about exclusion at all, and that allies are absolutely critical. But it is important that when groups are disenfranchised, that they have the opportunity to come together, and they've got that safe space to be open about experiences and challenges. Women's networks, though, are empowering and inspiring. They enable women to come together, to reconnect, to re-energize ourselves. And in that way, they enable us to go back into the workplace with renewed energy and vigor, enabling us to bring our whole self back to work. What's not to like about that? And in that sense, supporting us to be ourselves, women's networks really are crucial for equality and inclusion, as opposed to the opposite. And you may be unsurprised to hear that I didn't hear back from that chap after I'd said that to him. But his comments were useful nonetheless, and certainly coupled with my early experiences of joining Wish, they're beginning to help shape, I suppose, where I see our priorities are over the next 18 months or so. And they really are a renewed focus on that value of networking, on that ability to be able to come together, to share experiences, to learn, to be inspired, to enable us to go back into work, go back into our lives with that energy and vigor, filling up our positive tanks, or filling up our tanks with positive petrol. And the other thing as well is about that inclusion piece. It is really important that we are inclusive, both in terms of allies, because, when we're talking about something like mental health, we have to involve everybody who's part of the solution in that. That's not just a female thing at all. But it's not just in terms of male allies, but it's also those who might identify as trans and those who may not identify in a binary male or female way, and yet experience the same or similar barriers and challenges in their careers. And I'm absolutely committed to make sure that that's what we do. And so, in terms of a summary, I suppose I'd like to quote from Maya Angelou: women's networks are really positive for women. It's coming together and having those networks, not just through Wish, but our informal networks, our friends, our family. They provide us with that positive petrol to enable us to flourish and grow and to be our best selves, and bring that best self to our working environment and just into our lives. Because as Maya said, we all rise when women rise, which is why it's so important. And I'll end on that and take any questions.
Fabulous, thank you, Lucy. And there's a little virtual round of applause, as everybody's had today. And just to say thank you for sharing your story, thank you for sharing your vision. I think it's super important to understand where you see Wish going, and how you're going to support this amazing network of women to help get themselves onto a level playing field one day. I think we've got a way to go, but hopefully we will get there sooner than we would have liked.
We will.
And also, interestingly, it dovetails fantastically with mental health, obviously, because being your authentic self and taking your true self to work is so important when we're looking after our own mental, emotional, social well-being. So I think it couldn't have been a more rounded session, and to finish off with you was absolutely fantastic. I might ask myself another question, just because I'm being greedy, to be perfectly honest, Lucy. It's really interesting to hear your kind of vision and your feeling about Wish as you've come into the organisation as the new MD. And I joined Wish when Nicola was looking to hand it over, and my first interaction with Wish was with Nicola, actually, an incredibly inspirational woman who feels fiercely, strongly about Wish and what it is here to achieve, and what she wants it to continue to do, and has grown this amazing network and product, which you obviously now are stewarding fantastically, I don't doubt. So what do you think are your key projects, I guess, in the next sort of year, 6 months, as you get your feet under the table and you understand what Wish is trying to deliver? What do you see the future being? And if there's one or two things that we can do in the East to help you along the way, that would be really helpful to understand what they might be, I think, for people on the call.
Certainly one of the things is about inclusion, and like I say, that allies bit is really important, and I'm aware that conversations happened before I came in about the role of men, and men have a really important role, like I say, and I think something like the menopause, for example, is a subject that obviously we've talked about a lot, and we've had some previous excellent events about. And it's really important when you think about something like menopause that the men are involved in those conversations, because we're not going to change anything otherwise, are we? You know, and what Wish did, I thought, really well was they had an initial event in terms of the menopause, and the second one, the follow-ups, actually this week. And the original event, the first event, if you like, was a lot of women sharing their stories, incredibly powerful. The chat was phenomenal. I learned all sorts of things about woolen duvets and things that I never knew existed. But that was particularly a women's event, and it was those shared personal stories. The place for men is at the follow-up event that's happening this week. And that's all about, well, what are we going to do in the workplace then? Because they need to be involved in those conversations. You know, a lot of men are making those decisions. They're within the HR teams, you know, they're the chief execs quite often, obviously. So they need to be involved in those discussions.
We are trying to change some of that, Lucy. Some of us are trying to change.
I know, and doing a wonderful job, Hannah, definitely. But, you know, like we said, we've got some way to go. And, you know, those people need to be involved in those conversations. It's really important that Wish understands and includes men at the right time, you know, for all of the right reasons. They've got to be part of that conversation. And I think, you know, when we're talking about that conversation, we need to make sure we get our language right. And again, the menopause is another example. So it's not just an issue for somebody who identifies in a binary female way, but, you know, so there's people who don't identify in a binary female way or identify as gender non-conforming who will experience menopause and all of the associated challenges that go with it. So it's really important that we make sure our language is incredibly inclusive as well, and that we're not closing the door to people. Likewise, in terms of trans inclusion, you know, trans women are the most discriminated groups, one of the most discriminated groups. And it's really important that we include them and we have that active inclusion piece. So I think inclusion really is a key thing. And in terms of diversity as well, you know, and getting our own ship in order, there's a number of things that we can do, you know, not least some of the monitoring that hasn't happened, which I will be spearheading as well.
I was involved in a LGBTQ plus History Month talk last week, and I got some really horrible online abuse actually whilst I was delivering the speech. So some really quite unpleasant homophobic stuff that was directed at me as I was delivering it, and it made me realise, just as a female, because it was very female specific abuse, how far we still had to come. And I think I'd kind of got a little bit lackadaisical, actually. I kind of thought like we'd gone further down this road than we are, and we just, it was a quite sobering experience for me. And I mean, you know, this is a long time ago for me. It's been a long time since I faced that level of pointed, unpleasant homophobia. Yeah. And it kind of came back to me thinking, blimey, we're doing all this amazing work. You've got Wish in this at your forefront. We've got LGBTQ+, we've got Trans Alliance. There's lots of things going on. You've got Black History Month. You know, we've got the HGN network within housing. And still, this is permeating through where this inclusion and equality thing is just not happening. And I just think, yeah, I'm really, really refreshed to hear that it's something that Wish is really going to really focus on, because I think it's just the more we can do to educate and support everybody in an inclusive manner, the better it will be for everybody, and we'll have a far better planet, frankly, let alone sector forward. Yeah. And as a mother of 3 boys, I most definitely will be making sure that they are checking into what happens to females through menopause, as my wife and I are heading, unfortunately, careering in that direction. So
that's scary, isn't it? Yeah.
Very scary.
Tracy's just asked, can I talk about my performance at work once I could talk about mental health? I think one of the biggest things that I've done, and now I've kind of reflected, is I've pushed really hard and made myself work over and above, actually sometimes to the detriment of myself and perhaps some of my team. Actually, it's okay just to take my foot off that throttle now, because, you know, I was actually kind of just going too fast, and just like I was like little Tasmanian devil at times, and I kind of react. I can find myself doing that now, but I know how to pull myself back. And actually, I've said to kind of my line manager, like, you see that, just say it, because it doesn't offend me, because it's just kind of behaviors from previous, like, I have to push, I have to be the best, I have to do this. And actually, I'm a human being. We're going to make mistakes, and that took me again a long time to understand. Is like, I would literally just kind of just chastise myself for if I did something wrong. So yeah, it's been nice to have that open forum just to say, be honest with me, because I know sometimes that I can just go just too fast and just take things too quickly.
Can I chip in, Liz?
Yeah.
Just to add on that, do you think it's just a question sort of generally putting it out there about women and how we do that quite a lot from what I have seen? We do a similar sort of thing, a lot of us, where we sort of try and kill ourselves. I mean, look at me, I'm here delivering with COVID, trying, you know, because I care and I want to do a good job, but I do see this quite a lot with women. I certainly see it in my industry, in the legal industry, so it seems to be a common thing that's happening.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think and then we're probably all, and I'm probably seeing quite a few people, is we just have like mum guilt as well, because
yes,
it's like
the mother load.
As soon as like your child's sick, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, and it's like,
yes,
I'm going to have to. And I can remember the first time that I had to phone like my workplace and say, my child's got chicken pox, I'm really, really sorry. And like, before I even started my conversation, I was apologizing.
Yeah.
And like, they're like, people get chicken pox, Liz, it's fine. I was like, I know, but I'm like so sorry. And just that kind of guilt as well. And I think when we open up and actually just have a bit of understanding that we are just human beings, just take that breath, because nothing ever going to get you than again being sideswiped by something on a random Tuesday afternoon. And that's when you kind of just need to kind of pull that forward.
And I think we've got to be aware of again how we've all been socialised as women as well. You know, it's something I read a lot of books on the subject, and certainly it's something that I am trying to look at myself. You know, not to apologise if, for instance, my child is unwell, or you know, it's more about, you know, this is what happens to all of us. It's just ultimately it will be the women who are normally at the front line looking after the children. I mean, my husband wouldn't apologise, even though we share childcare. You know, it's not something that he'd perhaps do in the same way. And I just find it interesting to see if others are sort of, you know, finding the same.
I think there's a big part about educating though, and educating the generations after us to make it that isn't the social normative, that it isn't an expectation that is always mummy or daughter or wife or sister who's caring for an elderly relative, or someone has, you know, it's not just children based, is it? That can be about any sort of thing. And I think we dreadfully actually we are a gender of guilt if we identify from a gender perspective where we feel it painfully personally. It's about us. And I completely agree with Liz. I mean, there are times when I once got tonsillitis, and I was so adamant that I needed to go to work because I had a meeting with the housing minister. I actually ended up being hospitalised. I got hospitalised with tonsillitis at 37. The consultant said to me, I've never hospitalised anyone in my life of your age with tonsillitis, which I found mildly insulting because it was insulting my age. But equally, that was because I had driven myself to the brink of exhaustion because I was so desperate to not let down my then CEO, who actually interestingly was a woman who really wouldn't have cared. But I was so driven to do what I believed to be the right thing because I didn't want to let anybody down. And I think that's a huge issue for women in the workplace at times. And I think that comes a lot back to well-being and self-care, and actually making sure that we are looking after ourselves, we are doing the right things. I had a full breakdown in my early 20s when I was a serving police officer, and it's taken me years to understand what my levels are, what I can and can't do. And I get it now, and I absolutely know when I'm right and when I'm not. But that's taken a lot of long, painful reflection, and also a lot of honesty from a very supportive partner who tells me when I'm doing too much and I need to rein it in. So I think that just by nature, it's who we are. And I also think because of the societal norms and pressures that are placed upon us, we strive, because we've had to always historically strive to break the glass ceiling. But what I would say is you've got some fabulous individuals out there like Liz, currently Sandra, everybody on this call who is absolutely smashing a glass ceiling, and that will start to diminish, and we are starting to see that gap diminish. We've just got to continue to put our foot on the throttle, so to speak, and make sure that when my daughter goes through this, hopefully she doesn't have the same glass ceilings to smash, or if she does, it's much lower than the one that we've had to go through, I think. And that's what I kind of wish will achieve. And it sounds, Lucy, like that's absolutely what you're going to be delivering for us in the coming years, hopefully. Lisa says it's sad that we think we are letting people down or being lazy resting. We all need a break at times. Absolutely right. We absolutely do. And we should never feel bad about doing that, because actually, ultimately, we're not helping anybody if we're not looking after ourselves, are we? It's only going to be detrimental to everybody in the long term. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session. It has been undoubtedly incredibly inspirational, and really lovely to hear people's personal stories, and really helpful, Laura, from your perspective, and actually Lucy, for you to round up and what you're kind of wanting us to do moving forward has been absolutely exceptional. So thank you. Excellent to speak to everybody and hopefully see you all in person very soon next time we have one of these in the East region. So thanks a lot, and take care, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody, take care, bye.
Thank you everybody, bye.